You know that moment when someone says something and suddenly your entire day feels ruined. It happens fast, almost instantly, like a switch flipping inside you. But what if that feeling was never meant to last? What if it was only supposed to exist for a brief moment and everything after that was something you unknowingly kept alive? Here is the truth. The emotional surge you call anger is not designed to last. From a neurological standpoint, the chemicals released in your body during anger naturally dissipate in about 90 seconds. That is all. 90 seconds. Yet most people stay angry for minutes, hours, sometimes even days. Not because the feeling itself is still there, but because they keep replaying the moment. They go over the words again and again. They imagine what they should have said. They build arguments in their mind that never end. It is like a smoke alarm going off because you burned a piece of toast, but instead of opening a window, you keep burning more toast. You keep feeding the alarm. The next time someone cuts you off in traffic, pay attention. Your body reacts immediately. Your heart rate increases, stress hormones rise, tension builds. That is the 90 seconds. But then something else happens. You begin telling yourself a story. You label the other person. You judge. And suddenly, 20 minutes later, the anger is still there. Once you understand this, everything changes. You realize there is a moment where you have a choice. You can let the feeling pass naturally, or you can keep it alive. People often say, they really know how to push my buttons. As if they are powerless, as if someone else is holding a remote control to their emotions. But that is not how it works. No one can push a button that is not already there. The idea that others control your emotions is an illusion. What actually happens is much deeper. Those buttons are unresolved experiences, old wounds, or moments where your values were violated. They are parts of you that have not fully healed. When someone triggers you, they are not creating something new. They are revealing something that already exists. Think about a coworker who makes a sarcastic comment that instantly irritates you. Instead of reacting immediately, pause for a moment and ask yourself, what is really happening? Why does this bother you so much? Maybe it reminds you of someone from your past. Maybe a parent who was overly critical. Maybe a situation where you felt dismissed or undervalued. Suddenly, the coworker is no longer the real source of your reaction. They are simply exposing something deeper. This changes everything. Because if they are only revealing the button, not controlling it, then you are no longer a passive receiver. You become the one in control. You are not a remote control responding automatically. You are the operator. And once you see that clearly, you begin to understand something powerful. No one else decides how you feel. That responsibility has always been yours. One of the biggest misunderstandings about anger is believing that anger is the true emotion. It usually is not. What most people call anger is often just the outer layer, the visible reaction that covers something far more vulnerable underneath. Anger behaves like a guard standing at the front door. Its job is to protect emotions that feel harder to admit. Emotions like hurt, fear, rejection, shame, or disappointment. That is why anger often rises so quickly. It feels stronger. It feels safer. It gives you armor when what you are really experiencing is pain. Imagine someone criticizes you and you immediately become angry. On the surface, it seems like the anger is the problem. But if you look deeper, you may find something else. Maybe what actually hurt was the feeling that your effort was not seen. Maybe what stung was the sense that your value was ignored. The same thing happens in close relationships. If your partner forgets your anniversary and you explode, the anger may look like the main issue, but it often is not. Underneath it may be a much softer and much more human question. Do I matter to you? And that is where real change begins. Because saying, I felt forgotten, creates an entirely different conversation than saying, you never remember anything. One opens the door, the other builds a wall. If you can identify the vulnerable feeling hidden beneath anger, you stop fighting only the surface and start addressing the real wound. That is what creates healing. Anger creates distance. Vulnerability creates understanding. Between whatever triggers you and the way you respond, there is a space. Most people never notice it because it happens so quickly, but it is there. And inside that space is one of the most important forms of freedom a person can have. A trigger happens. Your body reacts. Stress chemicals move through your system. Your mind starts forming a response. But before you speak, before you send the message, before you raise your voice, there is a brief point of choice. It may be only a second, sometimes even less, but it is enough. That is the moment that separates emotional reaction from emotional mastery. When someone sends a passive-aggressive email, your first instinct may be to fire one back immediately. Everything in you wants to answer fast, defend yourself, or match the tone you received. But if you stop for even one moment and ask, what response would I be proud of tomorrow? You interrupt the automatic pattern. You step into that space, and that space changes everything. Instead of being like a pinball knocked around by every situation, you become the person holding the controls. You stop living at the mercy of other people's moods, words, and behavior. You begin choosing your response with intention instead of handing it over to impulse. People who seem calm under pressure are not necessarily less emotional than everyone else. They have simply learned how to live inside that space between trigger and response. They know that the first feeling is not the final decision. That awareness is a kind of power. And once you begin practicing it, you stop reacting from habit and start responding from character. What if you could watch your emotions the same way you watch a storm move across the sky? You see it, you feel its presence, but you do not become the storm itself. That is the power of what can be called the observer self. Inside you, there is a part that can notice emotion without being consumed by it. It can recognize that anger is rising, that tension is building, that your heart rate is increasing, and still remain separate from the feeling. This part of you does not panic. It does not rush. It simply observes. That distinction matters more than most people realize. There is a huge difference between thinking, this person is an idiot, and thinking, I am having the thought that this person is an idiot. The first pulls you into the emotion completely. The second creates a distance. It reminds you that a thought is something passing through your mind, not a command you must obey. Picture a moment when your teenager rolls their eyes at you. The immediate reaction may be irritation, defensiveness, even anger. But if you activate the observer self, you catch the emotion as it rises. You notice the irritation instead of instantly becoming it. And in that moment, you are no longer hijacked. You are present. You are aware. You are free enough to choose what comes next. This is what gives the observer self its quiet power. It allows you to experience emotion without surrendering control to it. Calm does not come from never feeling anything. It comes from knowing that you can feel something deeply without letting it take over your behavior. Many people think emotional strength means suppressing what they feel. It does not. Real strength is being able to sit with emotion, recognize it clearly, and still remain grounded. The observer self makes that possible. It turns chaos into information. It turns emotional storms into something you can witness instead of something you must obey. One of the most powerful shifts you can make is to stop seeing difficult people as obstacles and start seeing them as training partners. That one change in perspective can completely alter the emotional meaning of your hardest relationships. Every difficult person exposes something in you. The overly critical boss tests your resilience. The passive-aggressive neighbor challenges your patience. The controlling person in your life forces you to strengthen your boundaries. As uncomfortable as these interactions may be, they are often showing you exactly where growth is needed. Think about physical training. A good trainer does not help you grow by keeping you comfortable. Growth comes through resistance. Emotional growth works the same way. The people who frustrate you most are often the ones exercising the very muscles you have avoided developing. Imagine your micromanaging boss sends another flood of emails in a single day. The easiest story is to tell yourself that they do not trust you, that they are trying to control you, that they are making your life miserable. But what happens if you frame it differently? What if you see that moment as a chance to practice calm under pressure, to respond with clarity instead of resentment, to stay steady while someone else is being difficult? Suddenly, the situation stops being pure persecution. It becomes training. That does not mean harmful behavior is acceptable. It means you refuse to let another person's behavior define your inner state. Instead of reacting like a victim of the moment, you become a student of it. You begin asking what this interaction is trying to teach you. When you make that shift, even painful relationships begin to reveal purpose. Every challenging interaction becomes an opportunity to become more emotionally steady, more self-aware, and more intentional. The person who once seemed like your greatest problem may actually be showing you where your next level of strength is waiting. Many people misunderstand boundaries. They think boundaries are walls meant to shut others out, something cold or defensive. But that is not what healthy boundaries are. Boundaries are more like gates, and you are the one who decides what comes in and what stays out. They are not about controlling other people. They are about being clear with yourself about what you accept and what you do not. A healthy boundary protects your emotional energy the same way your skin protects your body. It allows what is good to enter while keeping what is harmful from taking over. Without boundaries, you absorb everything. With boundaries, you stay grounded in who you are. Imagine someone speaking to you in a raised voice. Without boundaries, you either tolerate it and feel drained, or you react aggressively and escalate the situation. But with a boundary, your response becomes clear and steady. You might say that you understand they are frustrated, but you do not respond well to yelling and would prefer to continue the conversation when things are calmer. That response is not weak. It is not aggressive. It is controlled, direct, and self-respecting. Or think about a friend who constantly complains but never wants to change anything. Over time, that kind of interaction can become exhausting. Instead of silently absorbing it or suddenly snapping, a boundary allows you to stay supportive without losing yourself. You can make it clear that you are willing to listen, but only for a limited time unless the conversation moves toward solutions. Boundaries are what allow you to care without becoming overwhelmed. They prevent emotional burnout. They preserve your ability to actually show up for people in a meaningful way. Without them, you give until you are empty. And when you are empty, you cannot give anything real at all. There are moments when the most intelligent thing you can do is step away. Not as an escape, not as avoidance, but as a deliberate choice to protect the quality of your response. This is the difference between running away and taking a strategic pause. When emotions are high, your nervous system is activated. Your thinking becomes narrower. Your reactions become faster and less thoughtful. In that state, it is easy to say things that cause damage, things that take far longer to repair than they did to say. A temporary pause interrupts that cycle. It gives your body time to settle and your mind time to return to clarity. Imagine being in a heated conversation when you are already stressed from something else. The pressure builds quickly. Words come out sharper than intended. The situation escalates. But if you pause and acknowledge that you are not in the right state to continue, everything shifts. You can recognize that the conversation matters, but also that your current state does not support a productive outcome. Choosing to step away for a short time is not abandoning the issue. It is choosing to return to it in a better condition. This kind of pause protects both the relationship and your integrity. It prevents moments of regret, the kind of reactions that linger long after the situation has passed. Many people think strength means staying in the moment no matter what. But real maturity is knowing when to step back so that you can come back stronger, clearer, and more intentional. Sometimes a few minutes of space can prevent hours of unnecessary conflict. It can preserve something that might otherwise be damaged by a single uncontrolled reaction. Your emotional reactions are not random. They follow patterns, even if you have never stopped to notice them. What triggers you today is often connected to something that happened long before this moment. And until you understand those patterns, you will keep stepping on the same emotional landmines again and again. Think about the people or situations that consistently set you off. It is rarely just about what is happening right now. It is usually connected to something familiar, a tone of voice that reminds you of someone from your past, a certain type of criticism that echoes an old experience, a situation that feels like rejection because it resembles something you have already lived through. Once you begin to recognize these connections, your reactions start to make sense. Instead of being confused by your own emotions, you begin to see the pattern behind them. For example, you may notice that authority figures who seem impatient immediately make you defensive, or that sarcasm triggers you because it reminds you of someone who used it to hurt you before. These patterns are not accidents. They are clues. When you identify them, you gain a different kind of control. You stop being caught off guard. You stop reacting as if each situation is brand new. Instead, you begin to anticipate what might trigger you and prepare yourself for it. That preparation changes everything. It turns reaction into awareness. It gives you the chance to respond instead of repeating the same automatic behavior. Understanding your triggers is not about blaming the past. It is about recognizing how the past still influences your present. And once you see that clearly, you can begin to move differently. You can step around the landmine instead of stepping on it. Caring about someone does not mean caring everything they feel. There is a difference between being supportive and becoming overwhelmed by another person's emotional state. And if you do not recognize that difference, you eventually lose yourself in other people's problems. It is possible to stay compassionate while still maintaining emotional distance. You can acknowledge someone's pain, understand that they are struggling, and still remain grounded in your own emotional state. Think of it like standing on solid ground while helping someone who is in the water. You can reach out, offer support, and guide them, but you do not jump in and drown with them. For example, imagine a friend going through a difficult situation who calls you every day to vent. If you absorb all of that emotion without any boundary, it will slowly drain you. You may start to feel their stress, their frustration, even their exhaustion. Over time, you become less helpful, not more. But if you create a structure around how you support them, everything changes. You can still be present, still listen, still care, but in a way that protects your own energy. You remain steady instead of becoming overwhelmed. This kind of distance is not cold. It is what makes long-term support possible. Because when you are emotionally drained, you cannot truly help anyone. People who carry everyone else's problems often believe they are being strong, but in reality, they are slowly exhausting themselves. Real strength is knowing how to care deeply without losing your balance. And when you find that balance, your presence becomes more stable, more consistent, and far more valuable to the people who need you. Most of the time, you are not reacting to reality itself. You are reacting to the story you tell yourself about what is happening. And that story shapes everything you feel. When something triggers you, your mind immediately starts building meaning around it. You interpret tone, words, and actions. You assume intention. You fill in gaps with your own beliefs and past experiences. But those interpretations are not facts. They are just one possible version of what might be true. Imagine receiving a short, direct email from your boss. One version of the story might be that they are unhappy with your work, that they are criticizing you, that something is wrong. That story leads to anxiety, defensiveness, maybe even frustration. But there is another possible story. They might simply be busy. They might be trying to communicate efficiently. They might even be trying to help you improve quickly. That version leads to curiosity, openness, and a completely different emotional response. The situation did not change. Only the story did. Once you become aware of this, you realize that your emotional experience is not fixed. It is influenced by the way you interpret what is happening. And that means you have more control than you thought. You can begin to question your first interpretation instead of immediately believing it. You can ask yourself what other explanation might exist. You can step back and recognize that your mind is creating a narrative, not uncovering absolute truth. This does not mean ignoring reality. It means understanding that your first reaction is not always the most accurate one. When you take control of the story, you take control of the emotion that follows, and that changes how you move through every interaction. Understanding these ideas is one thing. Living them is something else entirely. Real change does not happen because you recognize a concept once. It happens through repetition, through small choices made consistently over time. You do not need to apply everything at once. In fact, trying to do that usually leads to nothing changing at all. The real shift comes from focusing on one thing and practicing it until it becomes natural. Start simple. The next time you feel triggered, remember the 90-second rule. Notice the physical reaction in your body and allow it to pass without feeding it with thoughts. Or practice finding that small space between what happens and how you respond. Even something as simple as noticing your emotion instead of immediately reacting to it can begin to change your patterns. Saying to yourself that you notice the feeling rising creates just enough distance to interrupt the automatic response. Over time, these small moments add up. What once felt impossible starts to feel normal. The reactions that used to control you begin to lose their intensity. The space between trigger and response becomes easier to access. The people who seem calm in every situation were not born that way. They practiced. They repeated these kinds of responses until they became automatic. And that same shift is available to you. If you continue, if you stay consistent, there comes a point where difficult people no longer have the same effect on you. The things that once pulled you into frustration or anger begin to lose their power. And in that moment, you realize something important. The peace you were looking for was never dependent on other people changing. It was built through the way you chose to respond.